Final evaluation for FMP. My original concept for my project was to base it around the 2022 version of Smile in an abandoned building with 3 actors. I developed my idea through going through the behind the scenes of it, seeing how it was made, and it just popped into my head randomly about it because I was rewatching the movie. I thought to create a project about it, to make it like, got another movie, I like the movie, I've got mates that will do it with me, and all that. For my planning, the planning I did for my project was around looking through the YouTube clips of it, seeing how they made it behind the scenes, searching up all the stuff to do with the movie, going through websites to see the reviews on it, what people's opinions on it, how they would make it better, and what kind of dramatic effect they used in it. My project was closely followed, but then I hit a brick wall as one of my actors could not make it due to family stuff where he had to babysit one of his siblings. So I based it around that if someone couldn't make it, I'd swap an act around and slightly alter it. As we got to the abandoned building, we had realised that it was shut down. It was all covered, couldn't get in, not physically possible. So that had put a proper halt to my whole situation with it all. So I then had to quickly, on the spot, think of something that I could change it with. And then I decided I'm going to go to the woods and make it seem like he's being followed, but then also play it into the actor's schizophrenia, where he thinks he's being followed, but in reality he's not. If my plan had gone more smoothly, my actor wouldn't have been able to make it, and I would have been able to go ahead with the whole plan of my original plan of having it as 2 mates going into a abandoned building to explore it, as one slowly gets more effective with the so-called smile effect. But that didn't happen alongside with, if I had gotten into the abandoned building, it would have made changing my movie a lot easier, as I had already been in the abandoned building many a times and I know the layout of it, and I knew what rooms I wanted to mostly film in and how it would all go. But none of that went to plan. The things that I found the hardest was adapting my style of film around this one, as I mostly do calm films, but I enjoy the horror aspect, so I thought I'd try to do something to do with horror. Another thing that I found quite difficult was staying on track, as I thought I kept coming up with ideas, but then they seemed very unrealistic and weren't really capable of happening. And the third thing that I found quite hardest to do with it all was getting a script along, as none of my actors had much time to learn the script, as I was a bit behind on the project, as I delayed it many times. So I kept it as not many people were speaking, not much dialect in it, to keep it simpler for me and my actors. Things that I found the easiest on it was to do with, it's also one of the hardest, was the camera, as I had already used a camera before, and something that made it easier was the gimbal, so I didn't have to worry about my hands jittering across the place, as the gimbal did that for me. It kept it all smooth and still. The second thing I found easiest was to do with my my planning, with how everything went. As I knew what I wanted to do, I'd come up with a backup if some minor things happened, as I wasn't expecting 2 things to go wrong. That were the biggest things in my acting thing in the play, the film. The third thing I found the easiest was finding areas to film in, as I live in a very abandoned area where there's many abandoned buildings, massive forests. so I found that quite easy to do for me. To do with my research, as I said earlier, I was on YouTube looking at the behind the scenes for it all, seeing how they did it, what kind of mental strain it put on the actors, what kind of acting they were doing alongside the whole film, how they were preparing for it, and going on just websites about it, seeing how long it took them to do it all and everything. The sources I used YouTube, I used a bit of, they weren't very, I can't entirely remember the name of the websites, but I didn't use 6 websites, I used 4. I used YouTube for the behind the scenes watching the video, a wiki fan page about Smile, I think it's called IMBD, and it's a movie review show site about it all. And then I'd use just a general text box in Google for it, and it comes up when you ask a question, and it comes up with the little text boxes. The sources that I found were good was YouTube and IBMD, as it gave quite honest reviews, as there was many reviews for the movie. On YouTube it made it a lot easier to watch the behind the scenes and what it did to the actor personally, to their personal life, how it affected them, and what kind of acting I would need for it. Sources that I found bad was the wiki site, as not many people had been on it since the movie release, and the Google text boxes, but as much of it was when I searched up Smile review or anything to do with the movie, it will just come up with places to rent it, so that was the hardest part about it all. To do with production, the equipment and tools I used was a camera and a gimbal. I didn't use much for it, as it wasn't a very complicated movie, and I used a balaclava for the so-called person that's the schizophrenia in the innocent's head. I then also used, that's about it actually. To do with my production process was quite simple, as walking up to the abandoned building I was describing everything in detail to my actors and what I'd like them to do, directing them where I'd like them to stand when we realised the abandoned building was shut down, could not access it, gone to the woods to film it. I was describing what I'd like them to do, where I'd like them to stand, how I'd like them to portray themselves. The problems I encountered in that was it was very far-fetched speaking. It was a very vast, wide woods, so it was either really easy to hear something or really hard. And on some of the trees that we were filming near, there was a honeybee nest, so that made it a lot harder for the actor that had to stand behind it for one of my scenes to act around, because he was a bit afraid of it. Not because he's got a fear of bees, because he didn't want them to sting him. I solved them by quickly shooting the film many a times, shouting louder or projecting my voice across so both actors could hear it. The things that went well was the stuff to do with the camera, as the camera didn't play up too much or rarely played up, and when it did it would fix itself due to the gimbal. Listening from my actors when they could hear me was very well, and the shots taken during the production went very well. Some things that went badly was sometimes the actors would get it incorrectly, as I had miscommunicated with them, and it just didn't go well with that. Another thing that went badly was to do with myself with walking behind the actors, trying not to make too much noise, and the occasional fumble, that meaning I have to reshoot the whole scene, which got quite irritating to do with it all. Another thing that went bad in the whole production part was making sure that we kept our bags close to us, as it was very vast woods and anyone could come through and just take it, as William had some of his camera equipment in there and it would have gone really bad for him if we had lost it all. The things I could have done to improve my filming would have been checking the abandoned building, checking everyone's full availability date, and having another actor on standby just in case I needed them. Post-production, what software I did use was I used Adobe Premiere Pro and Adobe Photoshop to get my final end scenes. I also used Downey 4 to download the music in the background. The tools I'd used was, I didn't use many tools for it as I'm not that well trained in it or not that well adapted to the Adobe software with Premiere Pro and video editing, as I've only recently started it due to college. And then I had ended up using the basic default transitions to do with just dragging and sliding my shots into the frame and cutting them down. With the exportation with it, I had exported it in 720p, 60 frames, due to the max not being able to go any higher frame rate or quality rate of that. The things that I found the hardest to do with the editing was getting everything to align correctly, getting the music to align with the video, and the overall editing of it, as I had to redo it as we had shot it in 4K and the max I was using to edit couldn't do that, as it was making it all lag as the max are a 720p. Easy things I found was after transforming the clips into 720p, it was much easier to do so, as I could watch it in full frame rate and not have lag or glitch in it, and not having to constantly zoom out to get the full picture of it. I found downloading the music quite easily, as it was just a quick couple of keys to press to download it all, and the end scenes making, I found that quite easy personally. Overall, my successful piece, I personally think my piece has gone quite well with how many things I've had to change with it, how much I've had to do alongside it. I'm quite happy with the final work I produced, factoring in all the time I had to do it, alongside all the obstacles that came my way. The things I'm most proud of in the project was some of the shots in the film itself, the editing, and to sound a bit full of myself, my directing skills, as I got my actors to listen up quite easily. Something I would do differently in my project again would be to have many more actors in it, start earlier so I wouldn't have to deal with the problems I faced before, and have more backup places instead of having to find one on the spot.